There exists within the masculine psyche a profound contradiction that Jung identified as one of the most compelling mysteries of human attraction. While men are often portrayed as sexually direct and emotionally simple, when a man truly wants a woman, not just physically, but on the deep psychological level that threatens his carefully constructed sense of independence, he often becomes a master of concealment, hiding his desire behind elaborate defenses that simultaneously reveal and protect his vulnerability. This is not conscious deception, but unconscious self-protection, driven by what Jung called the terror of psychological annihilation that men experience when they encounter a woman who has the power to completely undo their emotional armor. Jung understood that masculine desire operates on multiple levels simultaneously. There is the obvious sexual attraction that men can acknowledge and express relatively easily, but beneath this lies what he called anima fascination, the recognition that a particular woman embodies the feminine qualities that can complete his psychological wholeness. This deeper desire is far more threatening because it implies dependency, vulnerability, and the admission that he is incomplete without her presence in his life. When a man wants you but won't admit it, you are witnessing what Jung called the approach-avoidance conflict in its most sophisticated form. His conscious mind recognizes the danger you represent to his autonomy, his emotional control, his carefully maintained masculine identity, while his unconscious mind is irresistibly drawn to the very qualities that threaten his defenses. The result is a complex dance of pursuit and retreat, revelation and concealment that creates the subtle signs we must learn to recognize. The first subtle sign emerges through what Jung identified as unconscious territorial behavior. The man begins to position himself in your physical and social space without consciously acknowledging his motivation. He shows up where you are, not through obvious stalking, but through what appears to be coincidence. He finds reasons to be in your vicinity, to attend events you'll be at, to frequent places you visit. This behavior operates below the threshold of conscious intention, driven by what Jung called the magnetic pull of the anima projection. This territorial behavior manifests in increasingly sophisticated ways. He might suddenly develop interests in activities you enjoy, join groups you belong to, or begin spending time with mutual friends who provide access to your social circle. When questioned about these new interests, he'll provide rational explanations that have nothing to do with you, because consciously, he may not even realize that his motivation is proximity to your presence. The second subtle sign operates through what Jung called protective attention. He begins to monitor your well-being, your emotional state, your interactions with others in ways that go far beyond casual friendship. He notices when you're tired, stressed, or upset, often before you've said anything about your condition. He remembers details about your life that indicate he's paying much closer attention than he pretends, storing information about your preferences, your schedule, your concerns with the precision of someone whose unconscious mind has designated you as psychologically significant. This protective attention often manifests as unsolicited advice, offers of help, or expressions of concern that seem disproportionate to your actual relationship status. He might text to make sure you got home safely, offer to help with problems you've mentioned in passing, or express worry about situations in your life that a casual friend wouldn't typically monitor so closely. The third sign emerges through what Jung identified as competitive displacement. When other men show interest in you, he experiences what can only be described as psychological alarm, though he'll never admit to jealousy. Instead, you'll notice increased attention, more frequent contact, or subtle attempts to insert himself into situations where you're interacting with potential rivals. He might suddenly become more critical of other men in your life, pointing out their flaws or questioning their motives with an intensity that reveals his unconscious recognition that they represent threats to his unacknowledged claim on your attention. This competitive behavior often disguises itself as protective concern. He's not jealous, he's just looking out for your best interests. He's not threatened by other men, he just thinks you deserve better than the guys who are pursuing you. This allows him to express possessive feelings, while maintaining the fiction that he has no romantic interest in claiming you for himself. The fourth subtle sign that reveals a man's hidden desire operates through what Jung identified as symbolic communication. His conversation with you becomes charged with double meanings, innuendos, and emotional undertones that carry far more weight than their surface content would suggest. This is not conscious flirtation, but unconscious revelation, the way his deeper feelings leak through the careful barriers of casual conversation. He begins to speak to you in a language that operates on multiple levels simultaneously, where innocent words carry profound psychological freight. This symbolic communication manifests in what I call emotional fishing. He makes statements designed to gauge your feelings, your availability, your potential interest, but disguised as general observations or hypothetical discussions. He might say things like, "I wonder what kind of person you'll end up with," or "You're probably too independent to ever settle down," or "I bet you have guys falling all over you." These statements appear to be casual commentary, but are actually unconscious attempts to gather intelligence about your romantic landscape and your possible receptivity to his unacknowledged interest. Jung recognized that this type of communication serves what he called the testing function. The man is unconsciously probing for signs that his feelings might be reciprocated before risking the vulnerability of direct expression. Each seemingly casual question or observation is actually a carefully deployed probe designed to assess the emotional climate between you without exposing himself to the risk of rejection. The fifth sign emerges through what Jung called somatic expression, the unconscious body language and physical behaviors that reveal what conscious communication conceals. When a man wants you but won't admit it, his body tells the story his mind refuses to acknowledge. You'll notice that his physical orientation consistently turns toward you in group settings, that his attention tracks your movement even when he appears to be engaged in other conversations, that his energy shifts noticeably when you enter or leave a space. This somatic expression includes what Jung identified as unconscious mimicry. He begins to mirror your physical posture, your speech patterns, your energy levels without conscious awareness of this behavioral synchronization. He leans in when you lean in, speaks more quietly when you speak quietly, becomes more animated when you're excited. This unconscious mimicry indicates that his nervous system is attuning to yours in ways that suggest psychological bonding far deeper than casual friendship. The physical signs also include what I call proximity seeking. He finds excuses to be physically close to you that seem natural and casual, but occur with suspicious frequency. He sits next to you whenever possible, positions himself within your personal space during conversations, finds reasons to touch you briefly in socially acceptable ways. These behaviors are driven by what Jung called the magnetic pull of unconscious attraction. His body is drawn to yours, even when his mind maintains the fiction of platonic interest. The sixth sign manifests through what Jung identified as time investment patterns. When a man wants you but won't admit it, the amount of time and mental energy he invests in your relationship becomes disproportionate to what he claims it means to him. He becomes available for you in ways that suggest you've achieved priority status in his life, even though he would never consciously acknowledge such prioritization. This time investment appears as immediate responsiveness to your communication. He texts back quickly, answers your calls regardless of what he's doing, makes himself available when you need help or support. More significantly, he begins to organize his schedule around opportunities to see you, adjusting his plans to accommodate time together while maintaining the fiction that these adjustments are coincidental or convenient rather than deliberate. Jung understood that this time investment pattern reveals what he called unconscious pair bonding. The man's psyche has begun to organize itself around your presence and availability, even though his conscious mind hasn't acknowledged the significance of this reorganization. He becomes emotionally invested in your daily life, your mood changes, your successes and struggles, in ways that indicate you've become what Jung called a central figure in his internal world. The most telling aspect of this time investment is that it often includes what I call anticipatory planning. He begins to think about you when you're not present, to plan conversations he wants to have with you, to save up interesting stories or experiences to share with you later. This mental preoccupation indicates that you've achieved what Jung called Anima constellation. You've become the external representation of his internal feminine, the woman through whom he experiences his capacity for emotional depth and relational connection. The seventh subtle sign that reveals a man's hidden desire manifests through what Jung identified as the shadow dance, a complex pattern of approach and retreat that reflects his internal conflict between wanting to claim you and fearing the vulnerability that such claiming would require. This dance is not conscious strategy, but unconscious expression of his psychological ambivalence, the way his deep desire battles with his equally deep terror of emotional dependency and potential rejection. This shadow dance appears as what I call intensity cycling, periods of increased attention, communication, and emotional availability, followed by seemingly inexplicable withdrawal, distance, or casual treatment that leaves you questioning whether you imagined the previous intensity. During approach phases, he may be unusually attentive, emotionally present, physically affectionate, or verbally expressive. Then, as if recognizing he's revealed too much or moved too close to dangerous emotional territory, he retreats into casual friendship, busy schedule, or emotional unavailability. Jung understood this pattern as the fear of engulfment, battling with the fear of abandonment. He wants you desperately, but fears that wanting you will lead to losing himself, his autonomy, his carefully maintained emotional control. The retreat phases are not rejection, but self-protection, attempts to re-establish the psychological distance he believes necessary for his survival, even though this distance tortures him as much as it confuses you. The eighth sign emerges through what Jung called projection and idealization. When a man wants you but won't admit it, he begins to see in you qualities that may or may not exist, but certainly represent his own unlived potential. His anima projection, his vision of feminine perfection that could complete his psychological wholeness. This idealization manifests as his tendency to credit you with wisdom, insight, emotional intelligence, or spiritual depth that goes beyond what the evidence might support. This projection appears in comments like, "You always know the right thing to say," "You have such good instincts about people," or "You see things that other people miss." While these may be accurate observations, their frequency and intensity often reveal that he's projecting onto you his own need for the qualities he believes you possess. You become not just yourself, but the carrier of his anima projection, the external representation of everything he finds mysterious, attractive, and powerful about feminine consciousness. Jung recognized that this idealization serves what he called the psychological function of completion. Through projecting his anima onto you, he can experience vicariously the emotional depth, intuitive wisdom, and relational intelligence that his masculine conditioning has taught him to suppress in himself. This is why losing you feels so threatening. It's not just losing a woman, but losing access to parts of himself that he can only experience through connection with you. The ninth sign manifests through what Jung identified as future fantasy construction. He begins to imagine, plan, or discuss scenarios that include you in his future, but disguised as hypothetical situations, casual daydreams, or practical planning that supposedly has nothing to do with romantic attachment. This might appear as suggestions about trips you should take together, careers that would suit you, places you would enjoy living, or experiences you would find meaningful. These future fantasies serve what Jung called the testing of psychological compatibility. He's unconsciously exploring whether his vision of life could accommodate your presence, whether your dreams and his dreams could merge into a shared narrative, whether the woman he's projected his anima onto could actually function in the real-world future he's imagining. The frequency and detail of these future references indicate the extent to which you've infiltrated his long-term planning. The most revealing aspect of this future fantasy construction is when he begins to speak about shared experiences in terms of certainty rather than possibility. When we go to that restaurant, instead of if we go to that restaurant, or you'll love this place when I show it to you, instead of you would love this place if you ever went there. These linguistic slips reveal that in his unconscious mind, your future together has moved from possibility to assumption, even though his conscious mind maintains the fiction that no such assumption exists. Jung understood that these future projections represent what he called the individuation drive through relationship. The man's psyche recognizes that his psychological development requires not just individual growth, but integration with the feminine principle that you represent in his internal world. The future fantasies are attempts to imagine how such integration might occur in the external world of actual relationship and shared life experience. The 10th subtle sign emerges through what Jung identified as unconscious claiming behaviors. The man begins to exhibit possessive or territorial actions that reveal his psychological sense of ownership over you, even though he has never consciously acknowledged any right to such ownership. These behaviors operate entirely below the threshold of conscious awareness, driven by what Jung called the archetypal masculine imperative to claim and protect what the unconscious mind has designated as belonging to his psychological territory. This unconscious claiming manifests in subtle ways that can easily be dismissed as friendship or concern, but occur with frequency and intensity that reveals their deeper significance. He may begin to speak about you to others in ways that imply special connection or insider knowledge, referencing conversations you've had, sharing details about your life that indicate intimate familiarity, or positioning himself as someone who knows you well in contexts where such knowledge isn't necessarily expected or appropriate. The claiming behavior also appears through what I call gatekeeping activities. He begins to monitor or influence your social interactions, offering unsolicited opinions about people in your life, expressing concern about individuals who might not have your best interests at heart, or positioning himself as a protective presence who can shield you from potential harm. This gatekeeping disguises itself as caring friendship, but operates with the underlying assumption that he has both the right and responsibility to evaluate threats to your well-being. Jung recognized that these claiming behaviors represent what he called anima possession. The man has become so psychologically identified with you as his anima projection that threats to you feel like threats to essential parts of himself. He's not consciously trying to control you, but unconsciously protecting what feels like his own psychological territory, the external representation of his internal feminine that he cannot afford to lose. The 11th sign manifests through what Jung called emotional leakage, moments when his carefully controlled masculine persona slips and reveals the depth of feeling he usually keeps hidden. These moments of leakage often occur during times of stress, vulnerability, or when his normal defenses are lowered by alcohol, fatigue, or emotional overwhelm. During these moments, he might make statements that reveal far more than he intended about his feelings, his fears, or his desires regarding you. This emotional leakage might appear as unexpected intensity in his voice when he talks about you, unusual emotion when discussing the possibility of losing touch with you, or uncharacteristic vulnerability when sharing concerns about your life or future. He might say things like, "I don't know what I'd do if you moved away," or "You're really important to me," with an emotional weight that surprises both of you, followed by immediate attempts to minimize or rationalize what he's just revealed. Jung understood that these moments of leakage represent what he called the return of the repressed, emotions and desires that have been pushed into the unconscious because they're too threatening to acknowledge directly. The pressure of these repressed feelings eventually becomes too great for conscious control to contain, resulting in breakthrough moments that reveal the true depth of his attachment before his defenses can reconstruct themselves. The 12th and perhaps most revealing sign operates through what Jung identified as sacrifice and service patterns. The man begins to make sacrifices for your well-being, happiness, or convenience that go far beyond what friendship would require, often without acknowledging the significance of these sacrifices, even to himself. This might include changing his plans to accommodate your needs, investing time and energy in your projects or goals, or making personal sacrifices to support your happiness. These sacrificial behaviors reveal what Jung called the lover's psychology, the unconscious recognition that your well-being has become essential to his own sense of wholeness and meaning. He doesn't consciously decide to prioritize your needs. Rather, his psyche has reorganized itself so that your happiness feels like a prerequisite for his own psychological equilibrium. The most telling aspect of these sacrifice patterns is that they often involve giving up things that would normally be important to him: social opportunities, career advantages, personal pleasures, or other relationships, in service of your needs or desires. When questioned about these choices, he typically minimizes their significance or provides rational explanations that don't acknowledge the emotional motivation behind his decisions. Jung recognized that this pattern of unconscious sacrifice represents what he called the psychological marriage. Even though no formal commitment has been made, his psyche has already begun to operate as if you are his primary relationship, the person whose needs and well-being take precedence over other considerations in his life. These sacrifice patterns reveal that in his unconscious mind, he has already claimed you as his mate, even though his conscious mind maintains the fiction of casual friendship or undefined connection. We arrive now at the most crucial threshold, understanding not just how to recognize these subtle signs, but how to respond to them in ways that either encourage the man to move toward conscious acknowledgement of his feelings or protect yourself from the confusion and emotional investment that comes from being the object of such intense but unacknowledged desire. Jung emphasized that awareness without appropriate action is merely intellectual masturbation. The goal is not just to understand, but to respond with wisdom that serves your own psychological well-being and relationship goals. The first principle Jung would emphasize is what he called conscious differentiation, learning to distinguish between signs that indicate genuine deep feeling and attachment versus signs that merely indicate attraction, sexual interest, or temporary fascination. The subtle signs we've explored represent what Jung called Anima constellation. You have become the carrier of his Anima projection and achieved central importance in his psychological landscape. This is qualitatively different from casual interest and requires different responses. True Anima constellation creates what Jung called psychological urgency. The man experiences your presence or absence as affecting his psychological equilibrium in ways that surprise and sometimes frighten him. If you notice that your moods affect his moods, your availability affects his emotional state, your attention to other men creates noticeable distress in him, you can be confident that you have achieved Anima constellation rather than merely triggered attraction. The second principle involves what Jung called strategic vulnerability. If you want to encourage his movement toward conscious acknowledgement of his feelings, you must create safe opportunities for him to risk greater emotional exposure without forcing premature declarations that his psychology isn't ready to make. This means responding to his subtle signs with what Jung called graduated reciprocity, matching his emotional risk with appropriate levels of your own vulnerability. For example, when he demonstrates territorial behavior, you can acknowledge your appreciation for his protection without demanding that he explain his motivations. When he shows protective attention, you can express gratitude for his care while creating opportunities for him to provide more of it. When he makes future-oriented statements, you can respond with enthusiasm that assumes shared future without pressuring him to define the nature of that future. Jung also emphasized the importance of what he called Anima integration support, recognizing that your role in his psychological development may be to help him integrate his own feminine nature rather than simply to become his romantic partner. Sometimes the most loving response to these signs is to mirror back to him the emotional intelligence, intuitive wisdom, and relational capacity that he's projecting onto you, helping him recognize these qualities within himself. However, Jung also warned about what he called the danger of anima possession, when a woman becomes so identified with being a man's anima projection that she loses her own authentic identity in service of his psychological development. If you find yourself constantly adapting your behavior to maintain his unconscious attachment, suppressing your own needs to avoid threatening his defenses, or organizing your life around his unspoken desires, you may be sacrificing your own individuation to serve his psychological process. The most important principle Jung would emphasize is conscious choice. You must decide whether you want to be in relationship with a man who wants you but won't admit it. Some women find the intensity and mystery of such attraction compelling. Others find it frustrating and emotionally exhausting. Neither response is right or wrong, but both require conscious choice rather than unconscious reaction. If you choose to encourage his movement toward acknowledgement, Jung would recommend what he called patient presence, maintaining consistent availability and emotional safety while allowing his psychology to evolve at its own pace. If you choose to protect yourself from undefined attachment, Jung would recommend clear communication about your need for conscious, explicit relationship definition and your unwillingness to invest emotionally in unconscious connection. Perhaps most importantly, Jung would emphasize that these subtle signs represent an invitation into what he called the psychological marriage, a form of relationship that transcends conventional romantic categories and involves mutual support for each other's individuation process. Whether this psychological marriage develops into conventional romantic relationship depends on both parties' willingness to risk the vulnerability that conscious love requires. The subtle signs he wants you, but won't admit it, are not problems to be solved, but invitations to deeper understanding of masculine psychology, of your own response patterns, of the mysterious process through which two people move from unconscious attraction to conscious love. Your ability to read these signs and respond with wisdom creates the conditions where hidden desire can emerge into the light of acknowledged feeling and authentic relationship choice. Recognition is power. Conscious response is freedom. Whether that freedom leads toward relationship or away from it depends on choices that only you can make, but choices that should be made with full awareness of the psychological forces at work in the mysterious dance between masculine desire and feminine wisdom. If you've been wondering whether he's interested but afraid to ask, if you now recognize signs you've been missing or misinterpreting, then your transformation begins with what Jung called conscious observation. Start watching for these patterns with new awareness, while maintaining your own emotional center and authentic desires. Subscribe to this channel if you're ready to dive deeper into the psychology of attraction and learn to navigate the complex world of unconscious desires and hidden feelings. Share this video with someone who needs to understand that men's interest often hides behind elaborate psychological defenses that protect vulnerability while revealing truth. And most importantly, practice this today. Identify which of these signs you recognize in your own life. Are you seeing territorial behavior, protective attention, emotional leakage? More importantly, ask yourself, how do I want to respond? What serves my own growth and happiness? These subtle signs are invitations into deeper psychological territory where unconscious attraction meets conscious choice. You have the power to encourage movement toward acknowledgement or protect yourself from undefined attachment, but both choices require awareness of what's actually happening beneath the surface. Stop wondering if he's interested and start recognizing that the question isn't whether he wants you, it's whether you want someone who wants you but can't admit it, and whether you're willing to create the safety that allows hidden desire to emerge into conscious expression. Your awareness of these patterns gives you power. How you use that power determines whether you become participant in his psychological development or victim of his unacknowledged desires.